And hi folks, I'm Mark McKergow. I'm lucky enough to be hosting the call today. I proposed the topic. My book is called Hosting Generative Change. And that's about how you bring people together in a good way to get interesting things to happen. So our topic for today on the salon is from dialogue to action. And I just have a few thoughts to present to you to get the discussion going. Let me just share the screen there. So I'm going to open with that well-known OD consultant, Elvis Aaron Presley, who famously said once upon a time, a little less conversation and a little more action, please. And of course, it's a great song. And you can imagine the kind of place where that statement might make sense. An industrial factory, people are supposed to be making things, hard working things, and there's a group of people chatting in the corridor. And you can imagine the supervisor, the foreman person coming along and saying, come on, guys, a little less conversation, a little more action. And this is, of course, the assumption behind this is that conversation is not action. Conversation is the opposite of action in some way. And when I was working, I started my career in a nuclear power plant as a physicist an awfully long time ago now. And somebody put up a notice when I was there on the notice board, which looked a bit like this. Are you lonely? Don't like working on your own, hate making decisions, then call a meeting. The practical alternative to work. And again, this is from the same school, isn't it? You know, a meeting is the opposite of work. It is not work, it is anything but. Well, of course, we are Dialogic OD consultants. And so we think dialogue is a form of action. It's perhaps not quite the form of action that everyone thinks about when they imagine the concept of action, which looks like people rushing around to do things. But we think that dialogue is a form of action. And so this kind of less conversation, more action is a bit of a muddled way of thinking about it. So we want, when we convene people, we get people together to do our work, do our organizational change work, Dialogic OD, we want things to follow on from our workshops, I presume. We want things to follow on from the conversations that we engage and the initiatives and the actions that we carry out, we bring to organizations. But we hope that things will follow on, but how do we do that? How do we move from dialogue to what you might call action? There's a problem here because as Dialogic OD people, we are not espousing of planned change models. We are espousing of emergent, generative change models. So if we get people together and all we do is talk about action, then it seems to me that that just looks potentially like building an agenda for a planned change model. So simply talking about action, I don't think can be the answer to how we move people from dialogue to that action, or if it is, then it's another one. So here is one of the models that's been around for decades, and this is my version of this diagram, acknowledgements to Sam Kainer, this kind of model of emergent change and divergence and convergence, and you start off with the purpose of the workshop or the conversation. You diverge with lots of different things being spoken about. You have what's called the grown zone, or maybe better, the emergent zone, which is about where interesting things begin to happen and new options emerge. You have the convergent phase towards, and then you move towards something. And Sam Kainer, in his original version, has decision point on the right-hand side of this diagram. I've put clear next steps. That's my way of wanting to work in a solution-focused way. And I think that may be one of the answers to how we move from dialogue to action. But the thing we want to avoid in all of this is, you see the little triangle on the left, that's what people call premature convergence. That's we get together, we decide something, and that's it. That's not a very interesting process. So we don't want to have premature convergence in our action steps, but we do want somehow something to come after the conversation. Oops, that's the slide for later on. So what we are here to do is talk about what can we do before and during the conversations in the work to kind of try and lead into something continuing afterwards. That's the topic for the next hour and a quarter or so. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Gervase to spotlight the I can probably do it myself. Spotlight the authors, and we're going to open the panel up. So
Hi, Gervase.
there we go. So we got that there, and add a spotlight. I think this is how you do it, isn't it?
I thought I'd done that.
Ah, okay, right.
I mean, you should only be able to see us right now on the right, and then is everybody like that? Yeah. Okay.
Fine. So that's our topic, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to ask you to make some contributions. Please keep them short, and please comment on other people's ideas as well. Who'd like to go first?
So are you inviting someone specific?
No, I'm inviting somebody to choose to go first.
Well, I'd like Tova to say something, because she said something really interesting to me before everybody showed up about this dialogue versus dialogic. So please, Tova.
Okay, what's going on with us that whenever I'm here, I start with my broken English? Okay, it's a good exercise for me as the not native speaker. So, okay. When I finished writing my book deals with entering and contracting for Dialogic OD, meaning being dialogic from the start, that I find very important. And I wanted to thank my teachers. And one of my teachers, as I saw them, even though I never met him and never spoke to him, was Edgar Schein. And he passed away a week ago or 10 days ago. I believe that everyone here knows that. And Gervase wrote a note about it, and others also. And I bring him here not only because he meant so much to me and because he passed away, but because of the conversation that we had. Gervase sent my book because I wanted a recommendation from him, not less than that, because he was my teacher. And he said she's not dialogic. And it was very interesting, the conversation that he had. We don't have time to go into that. But what I want to bring is after an hour and a half of talking and exploring and whatever, I came to the conclusion that there is a difference between what is called dialogue by Martin Buber, Bohm, Edgar Schein, the way they see dialogue and the way I understand, and maybe many of us understand, Dialogic OD. And I want to point especially to one thing. Buber, Bohm, Edgar Schein, the motion to dialogue after the 40s and through the 60s was utopistic, or how do you say it in proper English? Utopian and ideologic way of educating to a better world, to a more humanistic world and workplace. And not that we don't have these values personally as OD professionals. I believe we all do. But when we do generative process, we do not ask it as a prerequisite from the client. In Dialogic OD, the way I do it many times is a short process. It's crisis, there is no answer. People come together because they need an answer, not because they want to learn the other in me and things that, so it's a different type of dialogue. And for me, it was a revelation because we are using the same term and not necessarily meaning it in an ideological way, but maybe in a more pragmatic way. So,
yeah, what I loved what you said to me before was that, you know, dialogic is dialogue with a concern for action. Like,
yeah, true.
Yeah. Whereas pure dialogue processes don't have that.
Or not necessarily have that.
Yeah. Well, in a way, it's set up to avoid that. like, because the purpose is to be in the learning, to be in the, as you said, define the you and me. Whereas,
and the target could be a reflection, and the learning is of the individual. And for us, many times the learning is not only for the individual, because we are calling for a collective action in a critical situation. So there is this little difference between the two.
yeah, that's it.
I think one of the things that goes on for me, and I'll substitute talk for dialogue, that when we think about talk and action, there's an implicit model that runs through an awful lot of the way people talk about it. And it's literally, as Mark has said, first we talk, then we decide something, then we have action. And we have to get done with talk before we can have action. They're separate, it's a linear sequence. It's also a sequence that creates closure. The intention is to make a decision, and then we don't talk about it anymore, we move on. And so it fits a plan change, top-down, autocratic kind of model, if you will. There's a different version of talk and action, and that's where talk is constructive, not analytic. And the purpose of talk is that we create reality and what's important by our interactions as we talk with each other. And therefore, we're fostering these types of interactions, and we don't get closure, but we do get convergence. And what is intended is an interaction of people that is constantly composing what is important in the organization, and everyone has a part in that. And those are two different models. And sometimes I talk with people about which is the model that makes greatest sense for the issue that we're dealing with, because implicitly we fall into the first we talk, then we decide, then we act model. That's the one that's the most typical one, not the one where we are co-creating reality through the way we talk with each other. One's constructive, the other's analytic.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be interested to pick up on that, because I think that's very important. And it's what you said in your emails, Mark, about, talk is an action and it can be performed in different ways, exactly as we've been talking about. And one of the ways I like to think about what goes on in talk is that it creates different action potentials. The different ways we talk with different people about different things, exactly as Bob and everybody has been saying, create different contexts which have different implications and different action potentials. And in terms of ensuring that they are carried through, that they move into the next time period in some way, it's a lot about how much energy and motivation we get behind those action potentials in the conversation. That is the essence of the emergence for me. It's the idea comes into view, the generative image is lit upon, and energy gathers around that. And so there's a desire to do something in a more practical way, or in a different context, or with different people.
Judith.
I really appreciate what you're all saying. I think in many ways, the question, and I just want to build on what Bob and Tova and Sarah just said, is that when we think about dialogue, I think about the fact that what conversations are we having? And I think to Bob's point about, are we co-creating a new narrative? And I think particularly as we work a lot on issues around diversity and inclusion, the question is, we may each have a piece of the reality, but we don't have a full understanding of what that new narrative actually is. And so the work, I think, is getting whose voice in the conversation. Who are we elevating? Who are we engaging? Whose voice is making a difference? And so that new narrative really becomes a co-creation, so that we create from all those street corners or all those perspectives an understanding of what the situation is and what that new narrative could be, right? Which is not based on one identity or one perspective, but really based on kind of an amalgamation and an understanding of all of those perspectives in some new way. So I think the question about dialogue is, are we just talking to talk? I mean, I think about what happened during George Floyd's murder, when a lot of organizations had a lot of dialogue. Leaders were listening a lot, but they weren't acting. And so that's the question becomes, what actions are going to be propelled? Is it more than just, we're going to listen, we're going to dialogue, we're going to hear? but we're not going to act. And I think we have to really understand that that's an ongoing process, because many organizations, to Bob's point, have said, you know, here's the actions we're going to take, close it down, move on, as opposed to an ongoing conversation. And it's still an ongoing conversation as we look at those issues in our organizations today.
So Dave Pendle, who is a serial participant in these things, hello Dave, he often makes good contributions in the chat if anyone's watching that, and he has mused there, is analytic talk not predisposed to action? I think that's an interesting question, and my thought of it is, yes, it is predisposed to action, but it's predisposed to action based on the past, where kind of solving a thing that we know about. Whereas for me, the constructive language that we have started to talk about is more to do with drawing us into the future, perhaps. And there's a sort of subtly different quality about it for me. Gwen.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I've just been reflecting as everybody's talking, and for me, you know, my book was about moving our work as OD consultants into a virtual space, and kind of I guess the evolution of that is what that now means in a hybrid or a flexible working environment. And I've been having some really interesting conversations with leaders who are, I guess, going through this kind of ongoing process and conversation about, you know, what is our post-pandemic strategy around flexible working, whether that is, you know, a choice about numbers of days in the office, or whether it's being moved into a broader workplace strategy approach. And I was just thinking about those leaders I've been talking to who are really wanting that sense of, you know, we have a conversation about it, we make a decision and it's locked down, and then we move forward with it. And the impact of that approach with the rest of their organization, employee engagement, people making some choices about that isn't how I want to live and work now, versus those organizations who are taking a much more participatory dialogue and dialogic-based approach, where things are a series of experiments and being kind of left open because the conversation is still emerging and still evolving, because nobody has the answer to what, you know, flexible working arrangements or post-pandemic working arrangements look like in everybody's different organizations. And that whole notion of how in my consulting work do I help to create some kind of I don't know, whether it's an underlying cadence of nudging and encouraging people to reconvene about a topic at a pace and a frequency that works for them, is part of my approach to how I'm encouraging people to yes, move to action, but also to revisit and to reconvene and to re-explore and do some fresh meaning making. And I found that sort of nudging and reconvening momentum to be a really helpful way of supporting organizations to do that at the moment.
Fred.
Yeah, I really like that as a kind of iterative talk action.
Yeah.
And as someone was saying earlier, experimenting and piloting, as opposed to that 2-bit linear process, talk then act.
Yes.
And then we go on to something else completely different.
Yeah, and it kind of moves away from that sense of, oh, well, we've had that conversation about that topic, it's done and it's closed, and didn't we decide? Well, we may have made some small decisions, but actually let's keep the conversation open. And there's an inherent tension in there as well that I know that some leaders are experiencing, depending on their natural preference for certainty and closure and finishing something and moving it on.
And I think it feeds into that difference between decision making and sense making, which I really like.
Yes. Yeah.
What was the first one?
Decision making and sense making.
Yeah.
Yeah, the difference between them, and yeah, the tentativeness and the of the momentness of sense making, as opposed to the for all time of decision making.
Fred, we haven't heard from you yet. Do you want to come in and say something, please?
Yeah, I'm loving the conversation. I'm just thinking, kind of building on some of what Judith said, that, you know, a lot of our work around system change and large system change relates to diversity and relates to inclusion, which is a word in the workplace that we coined initially. And how the conservative talk shows now, and I listen to a lot of them on the radio just to figure out what's going on, are beating the hell out of the word diversity, totally, and be starting to beat up on the word inclusion. So we have that issue when we're going into an organization about what are you going to do to us and how political is this and all that stuff. So that's just the background that we have to deal with. I think that the key thing for me is, how do I have the leaders have patience with the process? How do I have leaders who want to, like, okay, I'm the CEO, let's get this thing done, da, 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 da. And I was like, this is going to take time, and we're not going to rush it. And then one client said, oh, Fred and Judith, they're not going to tell us the answer. We're going to have to, the answer's going to have to emerge from us. And it's weird. It's really weird, but I think it's okay. Because we need that validation. Because right now, an organization says, make it happen, do it quick, do it fast. If the answer's half wrong, we don't care. Let's just get it done. And this process, and our process, is much more of, we're going to breathe, leaders breathe, practice breathing. It's a good thing. And we're going to move through this process. And it's going to be time, and it's going to be emergent, and it's going to be people interacting with one another. We have a client right now where somebody wrote an anonymous letter to the CEO saying your direct reports and their direct reports are acting badly in these ways. They're doing this, all behaviors that are not acceptable. And they name names of the executives who are doing it. It's like, okay. And the client said, we can do one thing. We can call lawyers in to try to do some probing and investigation. Or we can ask you, Fred, and a firm to do it because you already been here, people know you. And then we need a process for doing that. And we're doing a process that will be emergent. We're doing a process that will use Dialogic OD. We're doing a process where we will help people for themselves figure out what's going on well, what's not going on well, what needs to be different, et cetera, et cetera. But doing that in a process, not like the lawyers would have come in and given them an edict about what they need to do, but doing it as a process where the people at those levels in the organization and others are together talking about what do they want to have? How do they want to be? How do they want to interact? What do they want to do? How do they want the organization to treat people? And have that emerge over time, not a 2-week come in, do a report and go out, and then nothing really changes, or you fire a few people and you act like you did a job. So the emergence is important. Patience is the key though for me. How do I help leaders when they're feeling anxious about it? When this leader, CEO's got to go to the board and say, you know, people are saying this, and the board's going to say, so what are you doing about it? So we're doing this emergent process with Khalil James and consulting group. It's going to take time. The board's going, what is that? Fortunately, I've met with the board, so they know a little bit about us.
Yeah. One of the things that comes up in our work quite a lot that might be part of an answer to that is what I mentioned before, small next steps. Small next steps that seem to be in kind of the right direction, but they're more like experiments, as people have been talking about. Now, we take the steps and we see what happens, and we learn about the whole situation by taking some small steps. So that has the advantage that it gives you an answer for the people who say, what's happening? We're doing these steps. But there's never a place in a complex system, I think, where you say, we've cracked it, we've solved it for all time. I think we need to get past that, of course, into this continuing learning, emerging, trying things, building on the things that seem to work, stop doing the things that don't work, and have another think about those. But you can, I think, kind of create a combination of action, a sense that things are moving with a continuing openness, which is what I like to try and think about.
If there's time, I'd like to add another aspect to the conversation, building on everything that was said. I took part in many attempts for a social dialogue between polarities in the Israeli society. It is ultra-Orthodox, ultra-religious and secular, or Arabs and Jews, or Palestinian and Israelis, all kinds. And there were times that the conversation was only by action. That if one of the sides could not act in a way that was honored and respected by the other side, then talking was considered as a way of not tackling the problem. So I believe that conversation is a form of action, but at the same time, action is a form of conversation. And depending when you use both. And what I see that we all say, what makes it dialogic is that it's iterative and not linear, as Bob said. That, okay, if we talk about something, we may say, let's try this thing. There is a constant dialogue between the conversation and the action as well. That it's not left for the end of the process, but it's an ongoing loops of talking about it, trying it on, then talking on a deeper level or on a higher level, until an action that is right emerges, not is decided in a way.
I'd like to throw in a couple thoughts, if I may.
Into the conversation here.
Can I throw in some thoughts, Gervase?
Sure. Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you. My perspectives on this topic of action come purely from the context of team coaching. So, and coaching over time. So a lot of these threads have been stated by some other folks, but I think there's at least 3 concrete tethers to action in the team coaching that I engage in. And the first one is around how the team sees itself and beginning to understand itself as an adaptive ecosystem. And that's why the experiments are important. So if what the team is, what we're encouraging them to own and then shift over time is their effectiveness, then experiments and learning have to be a part of that process. Yes, absolutely, dialogue, helping people feel seen and heard, listening closely, but the experiments actually need to become explicit. So over the next 6 weeks, this team agrees we will try this because it will give us a feedback loop into how we're experiencing each other and perhaps how our stakeholders are experiencing us. So that learning in an adaptive ecosystem is the first tether. The second one is encouraging the team to move as a team. In this dialogue process, I think people move at different paces. They will diverge, some will diverge and then converge very quickly, and you can see them. They're ready to go. They're ready to have the solution for the team. And others need to process, and they'll go through many divergence and convergence processes individually. And we always say the leader cannot fix the team. The team has to fix the team if there's something to be fixed. And so it's important as people express different levels of readiness to move to action. Sometimes we need to encourage people just to jot actions, put them up on a parking lot or jot them on a note until we're ready to come to a place together. So the team can own that sense of momentum. And the third is, I think, helping teams anchor into very concrete tools brings that pragmatism. And 2 that we use fairly regularly is now, next, and not soon. So of all the ideas that we might have generated for action or experiments we want to try, there's something to try walking out of the room. That's now. Next might be 2 to 4 weeks, but then we really want to acknowledge that we've come up with ideas for action that are not now, but we want to hold them for the future. So they're not soon, but they're still valuable. And the other is the liberating structure of what, so what, now what. We can talk a lot about the what, the extant realities of a team, but then what meaning do you make of it? So what? And based on our understanding of the so what, now what action, what would be the next wise action for this team to just try small steps? So I think those 3 anchors bring people to that place of action is I love what Tova just said. And I think I want to also say what I think Bob might say is we can hear that in their language. When the dialogue starts to shift, the CEO last week said, use the phrase brass tacks. And I'm like, there's the language shift. There's what we're starting to see as this natural energy towards ownership and momentum for action. And so action and dialogue are intrinsically interconnected.
Thank you, Ben. Sofnat has her hand up, and you'd like maybe to step into our empty chair. Sofnat, please unmute yourself and say hi.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the stimulating conversation. It's interesting. I'm active in an organization that follows David Bohm's methodology, and I am like I have a different course that I'm running there about dialogic relations. So Bohm talks about dialogue, and actually it's perceived as something to do. We are doing dialogue, and I am like taking it to an adjective dialogic being. Now, what do I mean by dialogic being? I mean really restructuring our connections, like some social constructionists say, positioning the other in a different way. The relationships are more on an equal plane and not like in Western individualist world, the I, the self, is actually takes priority, independent, and the other becomes secondary in the individualist culture. And the dialogic relations, as I see it, really try to change the architecture of us, the connection between us. And for me, I also love Buber. I think Buber never talked about how to do the I-thou relationships. So I've been trying to apply, to implement the I-thou relationships. And I think it converges now with inclusivity, meaning that we're putting the dialogue in the context of power. Okay, it's not something that we do, it's something that how we relate to the other, because if it's more prevalent that we put down other people, how do we change it? Actually, it's a huge challenge in our culture to be dialogic, because we are not dialogic culture. So there are many forces going on here. For me, it's a challenge how to restructure and repositioning ourselves, because otherwise we cannot co-create, because I don't think there's value in what you are saying. So we don't co-create. I am the dominant voice, and you are just echoing me, or I'm using you, I'm objectifying you. So all those things there's a lot of tension here, trying to materialize dialogic connections within the context that we live in, I think. And it's not only here. I have a daughter in Japan, and I also think they imitate the ethos, that it's so dominant that it dominates even other cultures. It's not that we are physically in Western individualist culture. It's the ethos of a dialogic, of not being dialogic, of being monologic, I would say, that controls what we do. So even the language that we talk here about what we do in organizations, as long as we don't talk about the restructuring of the relationships, there's not really dialogic relations. So I hope I didn't confuse you all. I am confused. So
it's very nicely confused, Sofna. Thank you very much indeed for joining in there. Well, folks, we are moving towards our breakout room section now, and Gervase is going to offer you the chance to go into self-selected groups by the kind of work you do. And we did this last time and it worked really well. So Gervase, are you ready to set up the rooms?
So the rooms are open, and if you've got the Zoom capability, you can just assign yourself to any room, and you can look at who's in what room and decide what room you'd like to go to as well. So some of you are going to have to just boldly pick a room and hope other people show up, and then the rest of you can sort of organize yourselves. If you haven't got the capability to do that, once that sort of sorts out, just ask me what room you'd like to get assigned to, and I can move you to that room.
So the question is about what's emerging for you from the conversations we've had so far, how you're connecting it with your actual practice, and maybe what more questions do you have?
No, there's no topics to rooms. There's no relationship to rooms. It's just decide what room you want to go to, or if there's somebody you want to go meet, invite them to go to that room with you.
So please go and meet some nice people, have some
Emergent.
interesting conversations, and we'll see you in 20 minutes, folks. 5 past the hour. So please enjoy.
Man, there was a lot of interesting stuff going on in chat. Holy cow.
So welcome back from the breakout rooms, everybody. Lovely to have you with us. Nice to have so many people still with us at this point. So first of all, I'd invite you to share what's emerging for you from these conversations in the chat to start with. And we'll all just take a moment of reflection and read the chat. And then I will invite people, if they want to say something, to step forward by raising their hands. But the first thing is, please think of something that's emerging for you from these conversations right now and stick it in the chat box. And so we can all see what everyone has been thinking and talking about.
Can we see everyone?
No, we can just see the spotlighted people, the panelists, but we have 93 people on the call at the moment. So you can have a look, please have a look at the chat. And the rich chat is still here, Jen, and we will make sure it is saved and preserved. So we've got tensions at play, helping leaders be okay with the emergent change, sense making creates internal change, and then that moves into personal action and group action. Yes.
I'm interested in this thing about the we. Oops, just disappeared off the top of my screen. When we becomes a power block, an obstacle to dialogic change. I'm not sure, quite sure what they're getting at there. Maybe that's just me. Maybe everybody else understands it.
Small cycles of action. Tom says, how important language is and common language necessary. Uncertainty and ambiguity we've got there. Shared stories in organization, reflecting how the emergent change, reflecting how the stories start to change. Thank you, Eleanor.
So much emerging in chat, it's hard to follow it all, isn't
hard
it?
to follow. It was very rich. Gervase, can we make
fast? Yeah.
Well, just while we're doing that, we can make sure, Gervase, have you got ability to save the chat? Because I don't seem to have.
It will save automatically at the end of the meeting.
Okay, fine. Well, we'll make sure.
And I'm also saving it as we go.
Excellent. Thank you, Gwen. Well, because we'll make sure that we send a copy of the recording to everyone who registered, which includes all of you and quite a lot of other people who could make it. And we'll include the chat with that as well.
Right. The recording will be available on our YouTube channel.
Yeah.
So, as are all the recordings from the previous salon.
Yes,
so.
Indeed. And I'll send out the link to everyone who's registered for this call. And a few people who gallantly gave up their places so that others could join us. Right, so lots of things emerging in the chat there. We'd invite some contributions now. So if you would like to say something for the panel to respond to, or even just to share your thoughts, please put your hand up. Please use the raise hand facility, which you can find in the reactions section, I think.
Michael Brazel, welcome.
Mike,
you got to unmute yourself there, Mike.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I've loved this conversation. Particularly, the thing that strikes me is how the conversation about what dialogue is in a dialogic context has been very robust. What I would love to hear more of is that process, the different ways in which different people working with organizations, groups, individuals, support them to transition once a narrative has emerged, help them get clear about the narrative, and then support them to, I'm going to go off because support them to move to what action or actions they would want to try out given the learning or narrative or aha that they've reached as an individual, group, or organization.
I really want to respond to that because I've been developing this idea calling generative change model for about 15 years. And it really came out of finding myself unhappy with the convergence phase of the K-inner model. Like we do a large group thing. We got 100 or more people, lots of ideas, and now we're supposed to pick one. And all the energy goes into the room. And you know, so what I've been doing is to create and the way I think about generative, what a generative conversation is a conversation that produces new ideas that people want to act on. Let's act on all of them. Let's not pick one, right? And somebody was talking about, well, this is about patience and going slow. This is much faster. It's way faster. You get way faster change. And so the idea is, let's not decide what the right answer is. Let's try a lot of different answers, try stuff, learn as we go. Now, Sarah Lewis and I just there's a paper we've written coming out in the next issue of Leadership and OD Journal, talking about, but you know, there's situations where we're running dialogic processes, but we can't do that, right? Where they have to converge for a series of reasons. So what's the difference between those two situations? And what's the difference in how we show up as facilitators and leaders? And I'm going to put that paper up on the BMI website today. So if you're interested in that, we're calling it the difference between high engagement and generative change strategies. And I think how we move to action is quite different in those two strategies. But I'm a big proponent of bring people together, generate a lot of new ideas, and any idea that moves us on our purpose, that fits within the guidelines, go try it out. And then leadership's role is to pay attention to what's happening and support and nurture and amplify the stuff that works. That's my solution to that problem. And Marty wants to come in too. I'm going to bring him.
I was going to say, go ahead.
Okay, Judith. Yeah, please.
So one of the things I was going to say is, you know, there's one thing about deciding on the behaviors that we want to instill, which I love the notion about many behaviors. There's also the emergence of, and one of the things we talk about in our book is bringing together a diverse and create an inclusive environment in which people then inhabit new behaviors. So it's not a decision process, it's an engagement and an experience of how can I be in this new narrative, in this new environment, in this new community, which generates new behaviors and actions. It's not even a decision process, it's an inhabitant process. And I think that, so there's one where it's a decision, what new narrative, what new behaviors do we want to put in place, or what new experience, whatever. But there's also about how we come together. I mean, I think in some ways we were just talking when everybody's in groups about, Mark, you're facilitating people feeling included in this salon today, and how that got people engaged in a certain kind of way. So there's ways in which the context, the ways in which we shape the coming together in and of itself creates actions. And I think it's important that it's not always a decision, it's a behavior. And it's a way of instilling a new way of being because of how we brought together, who's been elevated, what voices, what narrative we created. So I just wanted to kind of add that into the conversation, because I think it's an important one. And I think it speaks to, there are many ways to create that new generative image, because then we've experienced it. We know it's possible, right? And then that's the experiment, right? That we can then share with others from there. So
yeah, I so want to build on that, Judith, because I just think it's absolutely key. And I was thinking about it earlier. It's great to have the cognitive plans, and obviously we need those, but the self-organizing power of an experience or a metaphor, so that the behavior doesn't have to be directed or decided or micro-planned, but it's an inclination within people or within the group to behave differently together afterwards. And I agree with you. I think a really generative event, amongst other things, gives people a lived experience of a different way of being together. And if they like it, then they're encouraged to try to recreate it or carry it forward into a future. And I was always also thinking when Gervase was talking about which ideas get taken forward, for me, a really important part of that is energy. Which ideas have energy behind them that have come out of the group? And there's this very interesting conversation sometimes with leaders who say, yes, but I wanted us to be doing something, 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 and no one's put that forward. And it's like, well, are you going to lead on that and see if anyone wants to join you? or is it just not going to happen this time? You know, it's not the group's desire. It's not the energy of the group. Anyway, I'll stop now, but yeah, absolutely. Thank you. It was a great contribution.
So, Marty, I know.
Yes, so we've got, there's also, so I know Fred wants to come in, but Marty's joined us, and so let's hear from Marty first, and then we'll jump into all the rest of it. So Marty, say hello, please.
Well, thank you. So actually, I'm getting back to what you were saying, Gervase, about because I've been in those situations where you have all these ideas and it's like, now what, kind of like, and trying to get that convergence. And I love the idea of sort of, and I think, you know, the idea of putting the focus on where the energy is and sort of working on more than one. And as a systems person, I'm struggling with, but what if, you know, knowing that, you know, when you do something to the system, you can have unintended consequences elsewhere, or that a small change here can have a huge impact over there. And so what I'm curious about is, how do you make sure that all these different groups, people working on things, one, aren't working at cross purposes, and two, are having the impact, the intended impact on the system?
Well, I would say it's a great point, Marty. I would say that in a complex system, you are always going to get unintended consequences. There's no way out of them. The advantage of Gervase's thing about let's try it all is that at least we can find if there really is a clash. If there is a clash or an incoherence, as Keith has mentioned in the chat, you'll find out about it. But there may not be. You know, our thinking of how it works may not be right. There's always a possibility we have to embrace here. So I'd rather be you know, beholden to what actually happens than my concern about what might happen. If you like. I like
I would amplify
the real thing.
One of the underlying premises that supports a generative change approach is that every solution to a problem of organizing creates a new problem. So instead of trying to figure out what's the right answer and do that, run with any answer that moves you ahead, knowing that you're going to have to adapt to that. And it's a continuous process of shifting back and forth and adapting as you go. And Fred, you've been wanting to get in, and I'm going to.
Thank you. One, I want to support you around speed and fast. And at the same time, I want to say that's not always the way to go. I mean, before they merged, our client was United Airlines. You know, we can't have people out there experimenting without knowing where we're going. So that yes, we want people to experiment, but we got to have a process around that, because if not, people could die. So how do we do that? Another client of ours is the people control the electrical grid for all of New York State. The grid goes down, the grid's their responsibility. And so again, and they're highly regulated. So I want the speed, and I want the dialogue, and I want us to be successful, and I don't want things to blow up and go bang in the night. And it's how do we do that in a way that creates the change that's so critical, but doesn't have it happening out there where we're causing public or individual harm. So that's one thing I wanted to say. The other thing is that we talk about people taking actions. When Judith and I are doing work around inclusion, when we bring the group together for dialogue, the change actually starts at that moment, because all of a sudden they're interacting with people they hadn't interacted with before. And whatever comes out of that group, at least people have a different additional awareness. One of our clients is struggling around when women are in the room, men are talking over them. The classic thing. They haven't gotten to solution time, but just because they had that dialogue, people are already acting differently. And so sometimes the change happens just through the interaction of the dialogue. And then people say, I don't want to live in that world.
Just to support what you're saying, Fred, and this is where my thinking is, or part of my thinking is where, under what conditions can we use the little, multiple experiments simultaneously, and where do we actually need to converge, and what are the conditions for that? And
I'd like to give
my hunch is that there's a lot more opportunities for this than currently envisioned by leaders.
Yeah, I'd like to give an example exactly about that. I was working with the Israeli Air Force in 2000, and they were creating strategy for 2020, like 20 years from now. And you have to have a strategy. As Fred said, there is some reality testing. Now, I don't think that I hold the responsibility to have the strategy. The client are capable managers. And by the time that we reach the point of, okay, what from 2 days of conversation, 130 people, what rises up, what emerges? And they had 13 topics, and we asked them to choose 2 most important. We gave them sticky notes or whatever. And there were 130 people looking at me with these big eyes and said, you can't mean that. The fact that we narrowed down to 13 was the most that we can do in these days, maybe next week, but today, no. So I said, okay, wait a minute. We consulted, and what emerged is don't choose what's most important. Since each one and every one of you has limited time, which 2 subjects will not proceed without you? And that's a decision made by your gut and not by your mind. And it was a discovery out of distress. We didn't know what to do as consultants. So I'm saying what I discovered by that, and I want to offer as a tip, even if you have to make a decision, don't use only your rationale, but try to ask in a way that will employ your whole being. Nice. Or ask a few questions. That's what I'm going to do.
Well said, yes.
Okay, folks, so we have just 2 or 3 minutes left before we start to wind up. Anyone else from our lovely audience here who would like to pop in and voice something for everyone to hear? You have a chance now. Just raise your hand if you would like to do that using the reactions button. Because if you don't, then I am going, oh, we've got one. Sharon. Hello, Sharon Tewksbury-Bloom. I'm 2, actually, so you have to be quick. So Sharon, please come in and can we... I
don't see Sharon. Did she put
her hand up?
The hand button?
Yes, I'm here. Maybe when I start talking, I'll show up on the screen. Thank you for having me. I think part of what I'm still wrapping my mind around as an independent consultant that works with small organizations is how do we do this iterative process where we're also building the reflection and the chance for dialogue into action. So I feel like we're often talking about dialogue first and then action, but maybe thinking about what are the actions that the organization is going to take anyway, the things that are already part of their daily practices and ways of interacting with one another, and how could we help them integrate learning and dialogue and reflection into those existing practices and moments where they're showing up with each other, to kind of create that systems change, organizational change from that side rather than starting with the dialogue side.
Okay, thank you very much, Sharon. Gretchen has her hand up as well. So let's hear from Gretchen.
Yeah,
closing round.
Yeah, this is really quick. What I'm sitting with is just my own, like what it takes out of me, what's required of me to step forward into this space of not knowing. Because I'm used to trying to know where we're going and what's happening and it's going to all be okay and, all of that. And so I'm thinking of a client right now where I know that I've got an idea for what they might do that would be really bold and different. And I hesitate to propose it, so I'm aware of how, we talk about the anxiety being leaders. Well, I carry that anxiety. So just acknowledging that in terms of what bold new possibilities might exist for change and how am I a bottleneck for that? It's really uncomfortable. but I'm hanging with it.
Thank you very much, Gretchen. Right, we just have 5 minutes to go. So
I've been working, I have this other part of me, this thing called Clear Leadership, which I've been doing for 20 years. It's a leadership development process. And I've become more and more convinced that the core of that thing is my ability to be separate and connected at the same time to whatever's going on. And it's my ability to be separate from it in a sense where I'm not holding myself as responsible for the experience others are having. As a leader, that's the key piece of business there. And it has to do with this learning how, because anyway, I'm finding that this frame of being able to be separate and connected makes sense to leaders when they get it, that they can't really control what other people are experiencing. And it's not their job to make sure people are having the right experience or a good experience or that sort of thing, and it's their job to be holding a space where this sort of ambiguous, uncertain thing can be taking place. And the anxiety they're experiencing around that is their own. And when they can learn to be separate and connected at the same time, they can hold that space, even in the face of that. So.
Thank you, Gervase.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. We're just coming up to the end of the time. I'm just going to put a few notices, parish notices in the chat. Tova's course at the Cape Cod Institute starts next week. I believe there are still places available on that. You can find links.
Highly recommended.
Absolutely. All the BMI CCI courses, there's a link there. All the books, there's a link there. And I've just started a new Substack called Steps to Humanity of Organization, and that's free to join at Substack, which is there. So we have 4 minutes left, and I'd like to invite all our authors here to give closing thought. You've got 15 seconds each to something that has emerged or crystallized for you from our conversation, just to say cheerio. Who would like to go first?
I'll go first. I just want to thank everybody and be very appreciative of being a part of this. And people need to have dialogue. It's critical, it's important. And people are longing for it when they get the opportunity. We just train them that they shouldn't do it. And I think we need to untrain them and let them know that we'll grow, develop, and be better by working and being and dialoguing together.
Thanks, Fred. Who's next?
I'll just say here to Fred, actually. That was a great summary, Fred. I've learned so much today. It's been wonderful. It's been a great conversation. So thank you to everybody.
I wish there was some way we could, all 100 people who showed up, be more in connection with each other. And I'm not sure what that is. But I think the Bushe-Marshak Institute could be a fulcrum for that. If people have ideas about how to help build, I think, this community that wants to emerge.
So get in touch with Gervase if you've got thoughts on that.
Yeah,
easy enough to find.
A couple of people suggesting Slack as a Slack channel.
Let's not get into that debate now. We don't have time. But yes. Okay, who's next? Ben, say something.
Yeah, it's so wonderful to be in community with a group like this. And the opportunity to have done this, I think, thanks to Gervase and Bob for creating these places for authors and books to come, but just to see your faces, a number of whom I know, some whom I don't. I would just love to be in dialogue with all of you on your passions and your careers and whatever else we all got going on. So thank you to each and every one of you, and Mark to organizing and providing the central tendency around the event. Well done. Thank you.
Judith, say something, please.
Sure, happy to. Well, first of all, I'm appreciative of being included in this process. And I think, I think that it's so important for us to have the generative conversations about this work on dialogic OD, because I think it becomes a richer, deeper understanding as well of what we're all working towards, and as well as the tips. Tova, I loved what you said, for example, in terms of your, not going from our head to our gut. So I feel like I walk away enriched by this process, and I appreciate everybody who's joined us today. And the chat was very robust and very engaged. I want to go back and really think about many of the comments that many of you have brought today. So thank you for being a part of this and for including me as part of that as well.
Thanks, Judith. Tova, do you want to say a word?
Yeah, I'm left with Gretchen, I think was the name of the lady, speaking about how she wants to, I think that the fact that we are here and we talk and we don't necessarily agree is a way of sometimes more and sometimes less putting ourselves in a vulnerable position. And I find it both scary and enlivening. And when I was in the beginning of trying to offer leaders something that I was scared to offer, I would usually offer 3 or 4 venues. And if I would see the resonance to that crazy thing, and I would say, and I have this another crazy idea, and if they are resonant to that, then I'll go and try it out. With a crazy idea, I usually don't offer it solely, but with other ideas. So I kind of felt, and I'm really, if you have a way to write, are you interested? Because I feel what I'm staying with us, that some of us see dialogue as ideology that we must bring to the world. And some of us hold this ideology maybe as people, but come to the work as pragmatists. So I find it an interesting topic.
Who knows? Maybe that's a topic for next time, Tova. Who knows? We'll see. Sarah, do you want to say a word?
I'm just overwhelmed by the interest of people, and somebody else said that, you know, the tangents that are going on in the chat. I mean, how the rest of you managed to follow that and the conversation, I don't know. But whenever I look at it, it's just going in a zillion different directions, and it just suggests there's a wealth of further foci to be had for these salons. I'm looking forward to more.
Thank you, Sarah. Bob, say a word, please.
I think one of the things that struck me is how this conversation and other ones that we've been having is defining a mindset and fleshing out a mindset that Gervase and I initiated in some ways, but is being co-created by others around what is dialogic and what is dialogic change and what is dialogic leadership and so on. And that we are operating in a world where we sometimes are interacting with that mindset, and sometimes we're interacting with a different mindset. And all these interactions we're having today and elsewhere is fleshing out a model that eventually will become a clearer way of operating that we're all now co-creating and beginning to experiment with to see what works, what doesn't, what's required, what isn't. And I think that's very exciting. And I think we can get into the dilemma and the question of how do we capture this or what do we do with it? That kind of goes down one path. And I'm kind of in the world of saying, let's just keep having these conversations, because what's coming out of them is we all become clearer about what's necessary. And by our actions, we will begin to invoke and be able to act in ways that create this in organizations. So I find it very exciting. And it's, of course, always overwhelming to try and interact with so many people, but I find it exciting.
Thank you, Bob. Gervase, just say a very quick word in conclusion.
For me?
If you'd like.
Yeah, I thought I already said something, but I just say happy trails.
So thank you to all, and I'm really thrilled, folks, because we have 70 people still on the call, which is fantastic. And thank you for sticking with us all this time. The recording will be shared to everyone who registered. We'll save the chat and share that as well. And we'll hope to be in touch with you soon about another event in a couple of months' time. So thank you all for joining us, and all the best for everyone's work.
Yeah, bye-bye,
everyone.
Be
Cheers.
safe. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.